shall be shut. And I don't remember exactly what her disability is, but it's something related to muscles or joints, tendons, something that makes it so that she's not really able to walk without or get around without a wheelchair. So when we got to meet her at one of the breakfasts in the hotel, and she was able to like walk down from her hotel room without the wheelchair, but then the rest of the day she has to use the wheelchair to get around. And so she has small function with that, but then has learned to live with just kind of like a disability. And her message was super powerful. And I think it's such a different experience when you hear people who are dealing with like real, all of life impacting difficulty or suffering talk about their relationship with the Lord and how near he is in the midst of all of that. And then for her, she even shared just an experience with her husband, Jordan, and how he loved her through a lot of her struggling with deep depression and difficulties and things. And it challenged me as a husband, hearing how he loved her through such a difficult season for them both. And there are two specific quotes that she said that we're going to talk about, and probably a couple other things that she said. One of my favorites was she asked, "Are you shalom?" And when we hear shalom, we think of peace, but the word and how she broke it down is really like wholeness. And it's this image of like thousands of shattered pieces that have come back together to make a whole individual unifying thing, and talked about the process of healing in our lives through that visual where sin and brokenness and difficulty and suffering has caused us to have fractured portions of ourselves. And seeking the shalom and peace of God and wholeness is working with God and community of faith through the power of Jesus and his Spirit to unify those things and make us whole again. And I've been thinking about that picture a lot. And I think it's a very helpful picture for really anyone who's living in faith life. But I was thinking about it from a parenting perspective, where I'm working to help my kids grow up as whole as possible in a fallen world, And Hannah and I are seeking to help each other become whole. And we as a staff at the church are trying to help each other and encourage each other into the wholeness that God has for each of us. So, and then obviously personally dealing with your own sin and brokenness and trying to navigate that. So any thoughts that come to your mind from that?
Yeah, I loved her chat. And I think one of the things I love about New Room is that there's not, like they said, a green room that the leaders go out and like eat snacks and joke around and then come out. Like they're with you the entire time. And so when she came and sat with us during one of the breakout sessions for another leader there, getting to see how thorough her faith was. And of course, anyone can like turn it on for a conference. Our lead pastor has met her too and knows her a little bit better. But even the way when we like broke into conversation around her table, she was encouraging and like honoring and calling out wisdom and praying for us. I was like, oh, this girl's living out what she said.
It's the real stuff.
Yeah. And I loved in her talk, she said, our story began with wholeness. And I think one of the things that we have in common is we're going to talk about Genesis 1 if we get the chance to talk.
It'll happen.
And so when she started in the garden, I feel like I perked up. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this girl. And thinking back to like the design, the purpose that we had being made in the image of God, that we actually started with wholeness, and it's not something that we are trying to generate out of ourselves, almost like we talked about with the fruits of the Spirit. It's not just something out in the distance that like maybe we could get someday in eternity with God, but it's like that is what God intended for us, and now he's working to restore us. And she had talked about Jesus being the wholeness that we were made to be and failed to be, and he came to restore us into that wholeness. And so I thought that that was a more holistic picture of start to finish. We are on this pathway to being restored.
Yeah.
And I believe it was her talking about Job and his tents, using that word for wholeness and completeness too. Like when he looks out and sees that everything is there, he's like, that is wholeness, that is peace. And I loved that picture of like everything is accounted for. Like everything in me, there's nothing missing or nothing outside of Jesus's reach that he can't restore in me.
That's really good. Yeah, she talked about our start point was wholeness, and then sin entered in and created fracturing and that brokenness. And one of the main things that she pointed to that stuck out to me is one of the other main quotations I put here, which is when God asked Adam and Eve, "Where are you?"
Yeah.
And like obviously God knows where they are, it's God. But she used that to highlight that you can't heal from something that you won't call out, that you won't highlight as the reason for why you're hiding or why you're hidden, which, connects us to James, confess your sins to one another and you'll be healed. It's like until you confess, until you bring something out into the light, as long as you're hiding those spaces of you, they can't come back into wholeness. They can't come back into unity because you're keeping them out on the wayside in shame. And that "where are you" comes after you get the Adam and Eve were naked, afraid, and they hid themselves. And you have these three specific things that when sin enters and we have this brokenness, it's like you have shame because of the actions that you have fear because now you're in the presence of God, but you aren't in right standing with God, and that could result in the wrath of God. And then you have trying to cover yourself. There's like all these different things that sin causes us to hide ourselves from just being open and vulnerable and whole before someone. Mm-hmm. And it becomes like a shameful experience now that we aren't perfectly whole to try to show who you really are because we're broken.
Yeah.
So it's like if we were all perfect and you were just being vulnerable, your vulnerability is that imperfection. But now when we're vulnerable from a place of imperfection.
Yeah.
And that's can create shame, and which is why I think one of the most powerful things in the gospel is that Jesus is constantly paying attention to people in the midst of their brokenness when he doesn't have to. He's starting here and he's supposed to go here, and on the way he's passing by people and he turns and gives attention to them and sees them. And I think that that's such a key part for healing is the Lord is seeking us out. Where are you? And when we have the Son of David, have mercy on me, when we have that response, when we're willing to extend that part of ourselves that needs healing, that's when the shalom, the wholeness, can come in.
Yeah, and I think Becky, our children's pastor, leans on the one too a lot of, do you want to be healed? Jesus asking the man on the mat, because so many times we do just want to like back away and like disengage and stay out. And so it was a challenge with Shelby to be like, no, we want to like step into this. And I think even practically with rhythms, like in my friend group last night, a few of us were hanging out and we tried to do like a real heart check-in, and so much ugly stuff was just like, this is where I'm at for different people in the group. And it's not fun. And there's this like holy and awkward tension in the room of like, how do I encourage and support not living in shame? How do I like not rebuke too strongly? How do I like encourage them to be them full selves? How do I not step into control? And all of these dynamics at play. But it just made me so profoundly grateful for like a war on shame of like, even if ugly things are about to come out, like we're going to say them and we're going to be in it together. And then we're going to like pray for each other. And so that was a lot of my night last night was like, I have no idea how to do this wholeness thing. And I think Shelby even leaned into like being poor in spirit, taking you into full dependency on God. It's like getting to the end of yourself and depending on God. And I love that because it's like, that's really what I see I need when it comes to living out, not partnering with shame and hiding and covering up, but actually embracing like there is wholeness in Jesus, and in godly community we can find it together and restore one another through Christ. But sometimes in the middle of it, it's like, oh, this is ugly.
It's it was just so cool hearing her talk about that and sharing all of her experiences. And because we all resonate with it to some level, but then you see people who are dealing with difficult things, and we've talked about it plenty, the experience of going on mission trips and stepping out of your environment. And when you hear about people sharing their testimony of living faithful in disability, in difficulty, in a way that, like, we just take for granted a lot of the things that we're blessed with. When you get to spend time with someone who lives their life in a wheelchair and what that means for them, and they're the one giving you the wholeness, where are you conversation, you know, it resonates with your spirit in a different way.
Yeah, there was one that she said toward the end of her talk that just killed me. She said it's in the middle of our pain, not the absence of it, that we see the sufficiency of grace. And I loved that, because I was speaking at that other conference at the end of the week about how our uncomfortable emotions can lead us into the knowledge of God. And I felt like that hit the nail on the head for me, just confirming that, like, it's in our pain. If we don't disengage and pull away, we can actually see God as a gracious God and as someone who's sufficient for us, and lean into that. And that was not in my sermon. I was going to go into things that I'm like, yeah, let's talk about like fear, anger, and sadness, because I'm comfortable knowing God in those. But when it comes to pain, for me, I'm like, we'll find out later who God is in that. And so to see her kind of paving the way with such boldness and be like, she's like around our age, I was like, that's kind of convicting, and like, get up, girl, you can do it. Like, pushing myself to just say, I don't have to like sit back and wait for that realization to come find me. I can go pursue God in the midst of pain and see like she's made it so I could make it. And it was just really encouraging of like, yeah, I do actually want to know the sufficiency of grace instead of just like wallowing in self-pity.
Yeah. We sing the song Man of Sorrow, Son of Suffering, and just that reminder of who Jesus was. He voluntarily chose to suffer for us, and so he's acquainted with our grief.
Yeah.
And it's not, we don't worship a God who just has the ability to understand because he's God. He went through what we go through to be able to physically understand in a completely different light. And I was listening to another person that we'll talk about in a minute, Mark Sayers. He was talking about how one of his points in a sermon, I can't remember exactly what it was, but he talked about how awkwardness is good.
Oh.
And basically talked about how when he started in ministry and in the different fields that he's been in his life, that you feel insecure and you aren't sure about a lot of things. And it's the awkward conversations, the difficult processes of things, all of that actually strengthens you into becoming a pillar that people can trust, and where you actually build up your own, like, not in a selfish, prideful way, but like you actually trust who you've become, because you can look at your past and go, I've gone through all these things. And it's the same thing as looking at scripture and your own faith with what God has done in your life, where you're like, oh, faithful, 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 faithful.
Yeah.
And you can put your trust in that process, and you can trust in the character that the Lord has formed in you through going through those difficult things in a different way than if you haven't like gone through difficult things or had awkward conversations or dealt with those types of things. And so that's what that made me think about too.